Hello, and welcome to Illuminations, which aims to showcase some of healthcare and biotech's industry-leading scientists, innovators, entrepreneurs, and investors. My name is Jamie Kasuboski. I'm a partner and head of research at Luma Group. Today, we're honored to be joined by Cheng Zhang, the co-founder and CEO of Character Biosciences, Luma's newest portfolio company. Cheng has worn many hats in his career, ranging from consulting to head of strategy and innovation, and now serving as CEO and co-founder. Founded in 2019, Character Bio is a precision medicine company specializing in developing therapies for ophthalmic diseases, particularly age-related macular degeneration, or AMD. By integrating human genetics, imaging data, machine learning, Character aims to identify the genetic drivers of disease progression and create innovative treatments for patients lacking effective options. Luma is excited to announce that we co-led Character's Series B and are excited to be partnering with Cheng and his team. Existing truly at the intersection of AI and ML and genetics, Character is a blueprint for what we at Luma find incredibly exciting, and we couldn't be happier to be joined by Cheng today. Typically, we like to start out by hearing a bit about your story, letting you and our listeners hear more about your background, where you grew up, where you went to school, what drove you or inspired you to pursue a career in biotech?
Jamie, thank you. I was born in China, and in addition to living in China for the first 10 years of my life, I spent time in Germany, in France, in Canada, before moving over to the US in high school.
Okay.
Yeah, so I was really a resident of 3 continents and a citizen of the world growing up. And that experience was actually very formative for me. It gave me an opportunity to learn to adapt to new environments. So that was really a key part of growing up for me.
What took you from China to Germany to Canada?
It was really my dad moving around because of his research positions.
Okay. Yeah. What did he research?
Well, he actually did a lot of research in neuroscience. He was an imaging expert, functional MRI to be exact.
So it sounds like you're kind of carrying the torch. You began your career in consulting. You then moved to large pharma while you were at Pfizer, and then you moved to Clover Health. What made you think of starting Character Bio? What was some of the key moments that convinced you need to go on this journey?
Prior to starting Character, as you noted, I was spending over a decade in management consulting in the pharma industry. Within management consulting, I was very much focused on business model innovation, new product designs, new market entry. And then when I was in pharma, I was working for Pfizer and heading up strategy, innovation. And that experience really gave me good exposure to high-performing teams. What does that look like? Great leaders, and how do they shape and form the direction of that team? And what are really great business models? So that experience gave me the self-awareness as well as a toolkit for me to take on the responsibility of building something new. Everything crystallized when I met a gentleman by the name of Vivek Garipalli. Vivek had a founding role in Clover Health, was a founding investor in Flatiron Health. And when we started talking about the concept of a patient-first therapeutics company, we really resonated. And I think Vivek's vision and support for this idea was also a driving force in taking the leap to build something that we think can be transformative.
I don't know if you know this, I also spent some time at Pfizer. Always loved my time there. Really showed me that passionate people can drive innovation. And if you've got the right people, you can do great things. At Luma, we have a philosophy that better data leads to better decisions and better therapies and better outcomes for patients. This ethos is the core of Character Bio. Can you tell me a little bit more about the backstory of Character and how you kind of brought this ethos through and through?
In 2015, Matt Nelson and company published what we think is a landmark paper, seminal paper on the value of genetics-led drug discovery, showing that that drugs that have genetic evidence lead to 2x increase in the probability of eventual success. And then subsequent to that, Emily King and company built on that research, and what they found was that the quality or the extent to which genetic evidence increased the probability of success for drug development is largely dependent on the quality of the phenotypes. The higher the quality of the phenotypes, the better the rate of success, and it can go up to 8 times, right? And so then the question becomes, well, what are those phenotypes? What are the phenotypes that are relevant to inform and de-risk drug development? If you ask ourselves the fundamental question of what are we looking to develop drugs for? Well, for the most part, we're looking to not prevent disease entirely. That's very difficult to do. But rather to modify the rate of disease progression, change the course of disease. And so it's really important that we understand the clinical phenotypes associated with disease progression, right? That is ultimately the endpoints that the FDA or other regulatory agencies will use to consider whether a drug is successful or not. And so we really want to understand what are the genetic variants, what are the biological pathways that actually affect the phenotypes of disease progression, the phenotypes that the FDA cares about. And that is really at the essence of what Character is doing.
And I don't want to go understated. I think a lot of people look to genetics as to point to us as where in pathways we can intervene. But Character did something really unique. Out of all the companies we've seen, they took a very almost backwards approach of let's actually not only find those phenotypes, but what are those phenotypes that correspond to those endpoints, which shouldn't be understated. We at Luma were very happy to see that data. That data was like, okay, this truly does make sense. It's not just the genetic driver, but that genetic driver and phenotype, if you had a modification, will come out in your primary endpoints and prove to regulators and us as scientists that we're actually modifying it, that there is a direct through line through it, not just correlation. It's more a causal connection between everything. One of the most distinctive aspects of Character in its origin story is how it was built around gathering and curating the most comprehensive multi-metric ophthalmology datasets across decades of prospective patient journeys. It's quite rare for a private company to invest so heavily in developing proprietary data before even contemplating drug development. Tell us more about the data sets and how you're using more cutting-edge AI and ML to glean the most valuable insights from these data sets.
It's a really good question, Jamie. I'm going to break this down into the data set component and the application of AI. What Character has done at the outside of the company is quite unique, right? Because what we decided was that we needed to partner with providers and build partnerships with providers so that we can identify patients that we wanted to study, to work with them to enroll patients in our research. And so what we've done is consent patients directly into our longitudinal observational trial. We've gathered their consent for the genomics data, or the DNA samples we're collecting from them. Having built that database, the way we apply AI and ML is in 2 ways. One is, I would say, is more of a descriptive, retrospective look at the data, and the other is more predictive and prospective. So the descriptive element is just looking to understand, what are the differences among patients. Patient heterogeneity is one of the key reasons that we see so much failure in drug development. And it's really important as drug developers that we understand what constitutes that heterogeneity. Do some patients progress more quickly, others more slowly, others none at all? And what are the different biological pathways and genetics that influence those differences, right? I think we're using AI to quantify those differences. So for instance, the rate at which their visual function declines, or the rate at which a pathomorphological change occurs, such as geographic atrophy lesion, right? So that's descriptive. Then there's a predictive element, right? And this is looking at biomarkers that can either predict future disease progression or patient response to therapy. And the AI element comes in when we try to aggregate not only the genetics, but also those clinical features, demographic features that in totality contribute to the patient's risk for progression as well as therapeutic response. So those are the two major ways that we apply AI.
And I might spend a little bit for our listeners and more my enjoyment also, double-clicking on some of that, because I think when we initially started talking to you, we were very taken aback by how comprehensive, going from the genetics to literally optical scans that are telling you something about disease progression to those human demographics. I think historically, when we think about how others have used this, it's been a little bit less multi-metric, more single omic data. You know, GWAS studies, things where we have just single massive data sets that tell us interesting things about disease progression. But we have that across 3 or 4 different data sets. So would love to know a little bit more about like what that data really is. I think most listeners kind of understand that, you know, the genetic side of it, but tell me more about the imaging side and those demographics and how you were able to link them all together.
Jamie, what you're pointing to really gets at the core of what we need to execute on, right? Is there are really great data sets out there in the public domain. But to your point, they are looking at specific modality or dimensions of data. And the power comes, or the power of superconvergence, if you will, is unleashed when we're able to integrate those disparate modalities, right? And so that's why, you know, for us, it was really important that we were able to run that observational trial and get all of that data at once, right? And so to your question about what does that data look like, well, it starts with genomics as the foundational layer. Again, our first indication, as you mentioned earlier, is age-related macular degeneration. That's a genetically defined disorder, right? It's up to 70% heritable. So we know genetics is really important. Now, there are other biological layers that we can add on top of that, right? Things like proteomics that can also better characterize patients at the molecular level. But in addition to the genomic signatures, we have to get access to the longitudinal clinical aspects. And that data set is really rich in ophthalmology. Providers do a great job of capturing data around visual function, such as visual acuity, right? But in addition to that, there are consistent imaging that's performed for patients with AMD, which includes high-resolution fundus imaging, as well as volumetric OCTs as well. And when you think about the things that we can learn from these imaging, it's actually quite valuable, right? It tells the story of how the patient's disease is evolving and how quickly it's evolving. In fact, to your earlier point, that's actually how the FDA looks at it, right? How the drug developers look at it is how quickly are those imaging features progressing, right? So we can learn so much when we dig deeper into that imaging data. And with the help of AI and machine learning, we can automate and scale a lot of that analyses much quicker than we could ever imagine before.
And I know we've talked mainly about how we're finding the disease progression drivers, where we're going to leverage that for therapeutic development. But I think what really also got Luma really excited was at the end of the day, you can find these patients. You can find the ones that are fast progressors, the ones that aren't on this multi-metric data set. So it's not just a broken gene or possibly were they a smoker, some environmental cue, but holistically looking at being able to almost on first visit pick out, are they going to be progressors or not? And I would love to know more about that story, because I think from Luma's side, that was very compelling and differentiated.
Well, I think this is the definition of what in our mind is a patient-first therapeutics company, right? It's our ability to build trust with patients, with their providers, so that we can have not just one single interaction as part of a research visit, but multiple interactions over time. And that allows us to follow their disease, but also invite them to join us in subsequent research studies. It could be a study where we collect additional bowel samples. It could also be an interventional trial that we're conducting for our programs. So we really want to make sure that we build that trust and that we are providing value to the patients that we're working with. I think that is actually in the name of Character itself, right? Character for us is integrity. We wanted to build that patient relationship with integrity.
With the rise of AI-driven biotech startups, how do you ensure that Character remains at the forefront of this ever-evolving sector?
Our goal ultimately is to be a leader in developing therapies for the greatest unmet needs. So that's the objective that we are optimizing everything around. AI is ultimately a means to an end, right? So we're going to be leveraging AI in some of the activities that we conduct, but we'll also be looking at non-AI tools as well. And because that framing, we look at a lot of the AI-driven biotech companies as potential partners, right? I think there are ways to partner with AI companies that are looking at in-depth imaging data, right? There are companies that are leveraging AI for molecule screening and compound optimization, right? There are many ways for a company like Character to work with those AI-driven biotechs and together bring therapies to patients in a more effective way.
I think we can all agree that ophthalmology is a space of incredible unmet need across AMD and other highly prevalent indications that today are grossly underserved. As an investor, one of the challenges we're faced in is the heterogeneous and slow progressing indications is you're not only taking the risk in the technology and the biology, but also within the clinical trial endpoints. How is Character thinking about addressing these challenges as you approach the clinic?
When we think about clinical endpoints, right, this is really about how do we prove whether a drug works or not, right? And at the end of the day, what are we trying to accomplish with the drug? Well, it's to preserve visual function, right? It's to preserve vision. Luckily, in ophthalmology, there are actually different ways to measure visual function. So you mentioned best corrected visual acuity as one of those classical measurements of visual function. But there are additional ones, such as low luminance visual acuity, so how well we see under low light conditions. There are also microperimetry is another example. So that measures how sensitive our retina is, back of the eye is to light. All these endpoints are actually considered approvable by regulatory agencies, right? In addition to that, what we've seen from the FDA and others is that a lot of the imaging biomarkers, so these pathological changes that we can observe through ophthalmic imaging, are closely correlated or predictive of these changes in visual function as well, right? So that includes the concept of geographic atrophy lesion, right? So that's the hallmark of how dry AMD is progressing in the advanced stage of the disease. Right? How the photoreceptor layer thickness, right, is changing. Photoreceptors are responsible for sight. And all of those endpoints are also approvable. So I think we are very grateful to be in a day and an age when then the regulatory agencies are open to a number of endpoints. And they're very open to evidence supporting additional endpoints as well. So that gives us a fertile ground for research. And what Character is doing is, through the longitudinal database that we have compiled, understand these endpoints individually, right? As we talked about earlier, how quickly do they change? What is the standard deviation of that change? But also understanding the interrelationships between these endpoints, right? So is one predictive of the other? Does one precede the other, right? All of those relationships and the quantification of those changes are really critical for us to design a clinical trial, right? It's really important for us to understand which endpoints should we be prioritizing for a registrational trial, and which endpoints should we be prioritizing for an earlier stage trial where we might not be looking for approval, but looking at earlier biomarkers, early signals of efficacy, right? And also helps us understand how we might be able to statistically power a trial. Because in order to understand how to power a trial, we need to know what is the natural rate of change, and we need to know the standard deviation, and we need to know that by different patient subtypes. All that richness, all that knowledge resides in the data that already exists in the real world. And what Character has done is make sure that we can provide access to it, that we can unlock that knowledge for the benefit of the patients.
And I'm going to double click just for our listeners, they may be looking or not experts in ophthalmology. They may view the interaction with the FDA, these endpoints, as very new to them. So would love to know a little bit more about that journey of how you've been acting with these regulators, how you've been interacting and sculpting and perfecting all of these multi-metric data points to actually come to conclusions that this drug is going to be effective in helping these patients.
Certainly, we've had formal interactions with the FDA, and those are invaluable. But in addition to that, what's really important is that we are working closely with ophthalmology community. That includes both key opinion leaders as well as the treating physicians, right? So I mentioned earlier, in order to build out that observational trial data set, we have been collaborating with treating physicians. In fact, over 150 institutions here in the US. When we're working with them, we not only understand what are the endpoints that are relevant to the agency today, but the endpoints that could be relevant in the future, right? And even if an endpoint is not necessarily an approval endpoint, are there biomarkers that we can look at that will tell us, give us an early signal, early read on whether a potential drug can affect the registration or approval endpoints, right? So it's really a close collaboration with the ophthalmology community.
What does all this mean to the patient? Ultimately, the goal here is to bring sight back or slow the effects of AMD and geographic atrophy, the progression, which realistically is going to affect 1 in 8 people over the age of 50 at some point, at some time in their lives. What does this data show? what do the numbers look like regarding what Character's doing and how they develop their treatments?
Jamie, we're starting with AMD, right? And statistically, AMD is the leading cause of blindness in the elderly population. So it's quite a debilitating, prevalent disease. Globally, we're looking at 200 million patients, right, that are affected by different stages of AMD. If you look at the breakdown of AMD by disease stage, there is the early intermediate AMD, there is advanced dry AMD, sometimes called geographic atrophy, and then there is wet AMD. So today, when you look at the treatment landscape, there's actually good drugs for wet AMD. So we're grateful for that. There are patients with advanced dry AMD that are also receiving therapy, but there's opportunity for improvement. And then there is the patients who don't really have access to a therapeutic that can prevent their progression to advanced disease. And so what Character is focused on is, on one hand, improving the therapies or looking to develop a best-in-class therapy for patients with advanced dry AMD. At the same time, also look to address the needs of the patients who don't have any therapy to begin with. But I think we should also just take a step back here and think about what this really means, right? A lot of us take vision for granted, right? We don't really think about it because we have good vision. But as we age and we lose the ability to see, and particularly in the center field of vision, and that's the characterization of AMD, think how life-changing that is, right? You can't see your family members or your loved ones, grandchildren who are just being born, right? That's a direct correlate of sight. But then there's also the impact on your ability to move around, right? Be mobile, right? How does that affect our mental health? How does that affect our cognition? It's really terrifying to think about. I was reading a study that was done by the Johns Hopkins Wilmer Eye Institute, and they surveyed over 2,000 Americans. In that survey, what they found was that, in general, older people are much more fearful of losing their vision than they are of losing a limb, right? Being in a wheelchair, losing their hearing, or even getting Alzheimer's disease, right? And so I think the needs, the unmet needs of AMD, as well as other vision disorders that affect aging, are something that just needs to be addressed. And I would say, from a drug development perspective, it hasn't necessarily been prioritized, right? Like, I think there's a lot of focus on oncology, as an example, and there should be. But I also would argue that there should be more investments, more resources directed towards these age-related diseases, age-related blindness than we have seen to date. Because the impact on our, not just lifespan, but health span is tremendous.
I think this will touch, unfortunately, all of us, either directly, indirectly, but make immense impact. Why has there been, or why do you think some of the causes are for this lack of innovation or lack of, drug development within this space?
I think there is a preconceived notion that drug development in some of these debilitating prevalent diseases is difficult. The failure rates are high. And the failure rates are high because, as I alluded to earlier, there's a lot of patient heterogeneity, right? Differences among patients. And so a drug that could be efficacious for one segment of the population may not be so for another segment. But when we're trying to treat everybody, then the signals of efficacy that you might see in a particular population get diluted, right? Because of the lack of efficacy you see in patients who the drug is actually not designed for, right? And so what that leads to, in consequence, is clinical trials that are very long, very large, right? Expensive, right? And so when you combine the large expense or the large investment required and the low return in terms of failure rate, that discourages developers and investors. So that's why we think that understanding patients, understanding why they're so different, and being able to characterize patients and be able to predict how they could be different in therapeutic response to disease progression is so important. We know that precision medicine has fundamentally changed oncology or cancer drug development, right? It's made drug development much more successful. Why can that happen, right, in a lot of these chronic diseases? And why can't it happen in ophthalmology? We got the best data in ophthalmology.
So Character had some very exciting news kicking off the beginning of this year with a partnership with Bausch Lomb. Tell us about the announcement and what it means in the collaboration and for the future of the company.
So Bausch & Lomb, they are a legendary brand in vision and eye health. I think many of us know that they've been around for a while, but may not fully appreciate that they've been around for over 180 years. And their impact on society has ranged from consumer products to surgical products, devices, and pharmaceuticals, right? That's a tremendous legacy. Just as exciting as their legacy is the current leadership team under the CEO, Brent Saunders. We've worked closely with their R&D leaders now. They're top-notch, right? Proven drug developers in AMD as well as in a variety of other eye diseases. So it's really a privilege to be working with them. And our collaboration with Bausch & Lomb centers around the core thesis that we talked about, which is there are additional biology in AMD that we have yet to characterize and understand. That there is room, in fact, an urgent need for precision or targeted therapies, right? So that's the underlying premise, is that the recognition of that patient heterogeneity and the need for precision medicine. And that comes through also in the way that we've structured the collaboration, where they are tasking Character with mining our proprietary database to identify novel drug targets and develop new drug candidates. So it's really endorsement of the thesis of what we built from a capability standpoint, both on the data set front as well as drug discovery. So it's really an honor to be working with them. And we feel tremendously excited as well as an obligation to work with them to develop great drugs. And we know that they're going to be able to really nail the execution in terms of clinical development of the therapies that we would eventually develop.
Yeah, I mean, it really speaks to the character of Character. You've had all the stakeholders, from investors to the clinicians to the patients to everyone, even Bausch Lomb, some of the people who are actually providing commercial opportunities for these treatments. It really speaks highly that Character fundamentally, holistically thinks of the disease from start to finish, not only from the patient journey, but also the clinical trials, the therapeutic development, with the integrity to say we're doing the best we can with the best data to make the best treatments. How's Character really accomplishing this? We've talked about all the data, but how do you translate that data into an actionable therapy that will be in a patient one day?
We've done it the hard way.
Is there any easy way in biotech?
Right. right? I think it's taken a lot of patience
Yeah.
and perseverance, because you think about fundamentally what we've done is, first and foremost, run the observational trials so that we can build what we believe to be an optimal data set for drug discovery. That takes time. And that's something that a lot of companies have not done. And then once we have the data set, to be able to mine those data sets for insights, whether it's around drug targets or clinical trial design, or being able to re-engage those patients later for future research opportunities. That itself is a huge endeavor. And then to go from target selection, internal target selection, to internal drug discovery, to being on the verge of being in the clinic, that's a long road.
Yeah.
It's taken us 7 years. So we've done it the hard way. Now, I also really want to credit the partners that we've had along the way, right? So that starts with the team, to have that perseverance, to be able to see that vision through, right? We're true believers, and I think that conviction, that internal conviction, then translates to other partners. I'm incredibly grateful for the vision and the forward thinking of our investors, and grow the company in the right way, and just being very thoughtful about how much capital we take on, how to think about evaluation, so that we can build this company in a robust manner, not cutting corners, is I think the way that we've done it.
Yeah. And I'd say Luma's excited and honored to be part of that family, because again, you want to get the most out of all the stakeholders, and the investors are one section of this. So we're honored to help you on your path, get to where we need to go, because honestly, your outcome of making a drug to help patients is going to be mutually beneficial for us. We want the same outcome. We are looking for those next generational drugs that truly make a differentiated impact, not just incremental, but truly going to be something that's never been done before. So we're honored that you let the Luma family become part of the Character family.
And we're so thankful. I think we are very much looking forward to writing this exciting next chapter of Character Bio in clinical development with Luma. So thank you for your trust.
Given your extensive experiences, what trends or development in ophthalmology do you think will become game-changing soon? And how do you think this will impact how we manage Character going forward?
We're lucky in ophthalmology, right? So when you look at some of the approved therapies in many of these ophthalmology indications, they have demonstrated the size of the commercial market, right? And once that's established, there's then the motivation for innovators to step in and look at what's next, and to keep investing in what's next. And so now is an opportunity for us to look at what are the additional biological mechanisms that are contributing to the disease, right? So for instance, when you look at glaucoma, right? The intraocular pressure lowering medications definitely have their role, but they're not necessarily treating everybody and not really modifying the course of the disease, particularly for patients with low or normal tension glaucoma. What's really driving the disease for those patients? Is it a neuroprotective mechanism? Similarly in AMD, right? With approval of these recent therapies in dry AMD, now there is great precedent for complement pathway to affect disease. But what are these additional biological mechanisms? Whether that's in the lipid pathway, the matrix pathway, and how do we find the right targets, the right patient subtypes in those different mechanisms and pathways? So I think it's giving us an opportunity in the field, a lot of excitement to be bold and to really think about how do we meet the needs of more patients who are still suffering. And I think in addition to that, ophthalmology, because of its genetically characterized nature, because of its immune privileged state, also is a good opportunity for us to look at new modality technology, right? Small molecules, large molecules certainly have a very important role to play in the indication, but so do the methods of gene therapy, gene editing, RNA, cell therapy, right? So I think there's going to be a lot of diversification in the tools that we use to try to address this particular disease. And I think that's really exciting for the field. And for Character, our core contribution is really on that first part, right? In understanding patient heterogeneity and then working with the right toolkit to be able to provide the solutions to patients.
And I know we're starting out with AMD, but with these data sets, can you start moving into other places? This is just the first tip of the spear. Does Character have the ability to move into other unmet needs in ophthalmology?
Absolutely, because the core of Character's approach is understanding the role that genetics play in disease onset and disease progression, and then to be able to glean insights from longitudinal data, right? And when you think about other diseases in ophthalmology, many of them have that heritable basis or genetic signatures. Now they're going to be different from AMD, but they're genetically defined. And many of them are chronic and progressive in nature, where a study of the longitudinal data is going to be really beneficial. And so the thesis that we've applied to AMD, we think is broadly translatable. And for us, we want to make sure that we continue to prove out that thesis as our programs head into the clinic and get to phase 1 safety and phase 2 proof of concept.
So you have somewhat of a non-traditional background in the world of biotech CEOs. This provides you with several unique advantages and some challenges along the way. What have been some of the most memorable lessons you've learned through your career in pharma and biotech? And I'd love to learn more about, what have you found the most rewarding parts of these careers and what really keeps you motivated to keep moving through this industry and sticking with it?
What I've learned along the way is that, for me personally, whatever I lack in charisma, I try to make up for with humility. And whatever I lack in pedigree, I try to compensate with hard work. And I want to expand on that hard work piece a little bit. It was interesting because earlier in my career, I was working with this very established pharma leader, and she said something that stuck with me for a long time. We're working through a reorg, changes in the org structure, and she said that in your career you go through just a lot of changes and sometimes turbulence, right? A lot of unpredictable things happen. But what really is important in weathering that turbulence is the quality of your work, the quality of the execution, the attention you pay to excellence. And so that's what I latch onto, is that I can't control a lot of forces, but I can always control what I do, the commitment with which I do it, and my dedication to excellence. And so I think that is really one of the more memorable lessons for me, even though it may be a a simple, intuitive lesson for many others. You also had a question about what keeps me motivated. That's very easy, right? So for me, the fundamental metric of success for Character is going to be in how we impacted lives. And that is through eventual approval of drugs. Now, that's not to say that we have to carry a drug all the way from target ID through approval. We might need partners for that. But we want to make sure that we have an important contribution in getting to those approvals. And that's the only way I can do justice to the trust and the partnership of the patients who have worked with us for the last 5 years and counting.
I mean, it truly sounds like Character is more than a name. It is the heart of the company, the approach, how we're going to make an impact in all these patients' lives. As you build your first company, I'm sure there were people either helping you guide, getting you through the process, helped you influence your decisions, and helped you along this path. You know, who were the mentors who were really made a big impact in setting you on the course you are today?
That's a long list.
I know. I know. Shoulders of giants, huh?
Yeah. Vivek, I mentioned earlier, certainly comes to mind. He's the one who really set example for me in having the audacity to dream and dream big, in being a contrarian and right. And I remember the times when we whiteboarded and how exuberant we were in trying to pioneer the concept of patient-first therapeutics company, even when the details were not fleshed out. And that exuberance is so important. Peter DeLaura has also been instrumental in helping guide me on how to partner with the board, in navigating key hiring decisions, in making hard choices about what to do, but more importantly, what not to do, right? What not to spend organizational resources on. And then if I were to go further back, Dr. Wu Xiaobing, who I work closely with at Pfizer, he was the former CEO of Pfizer China. He made a big imprint on me with his infectious energy. In every single meeting, whether it's an upbeat meeting or a down meeting for everyone else, he always comes in with passion. And just undeniable force, right? Undeniable positivity. Something I always remember. Polly Murphy, my manager at Pfizer, she was incredible in the sense that she wasn't just a great manager, but she literally touched the lives of the people that she worked with, right? So, helping them navigate certain family situations, or putting colleagues in a position where they can succeed, and it may could be a referral to another group within Pfizer or another company even. Putting the team first and eating last was really something that Polly exhibited. And then further back, Nathan Wilcox. He's my first manager in consulting. And just the poise and the calmness and the apprenticeship model that he exhibited as part of consulting was really influential. It really taught me that, as a leader, I have a role to play in mentoring my colleagues and putting them in a position to succeed.
That came through when we got to know each other over the past year of where the passion is. And leaders lead from the front, and they carry their team, and they help support them, and they plus up everyone. And we've seen that across the board. from your interactions, talking to your board members, talking to other investors that maybe interacted with you, talking to the KOLs that you've built and kind of helped network into Character itself, even talking to Bala Shalom and Brent. Just everyone was so impressed with your poise, your character, that through line of this is going to be hard, but we're going to do it together. And if we get it right, we get to make a serious impact. What's one piece of advice you would give to aspiring entrepreneurs within the biotech ecosystem? You've had a lot of great mentors, but what would you like to pass on to the future generations?
Also, as I said earlier, I'm not a grizzled veteran yet, but I'll share what I tell myself, right? I think fundamentally what differentiates an entrepreneur is the will. So it's that indomitable, unrelenting will. It's the will to learn, to succeed, to make an impact, to do something that no one else has done before. And I think that will is an entrepreneur's most important asset. It needs to be protected. It needs to be harnessed. There are going to be a lot of forces that could potentially compromise that will. And I think it's really important that as an entrepreneur, as well as a partner of entrepreneur, that we're able to continue to protect it.
So we've learned the origin story of Character, from how it was built from the ground up with a very patient-centric focus, and now moving into therapeutic development, and hopefully within the near future into patients. At Illuma, we're very excited about that outcome. But tell us what's next for you and Character as we move forward on this journey together.
Well, we're going to keep it very focused, right? So we have 2 programs that are moving into the clinic. We want to make sure that we do everything we can to run these trials effectively, and at the end of that, be able to establish both safety as well as clinical efficacy through the end of the phase 2 studies. And we think that's really exciting because not only does that validate the value of these programs, but also helps support the unique approach that we're taking, right? The thesis that we have. We're very committed to the Bausch & Lomb collaboration, the opportunity for us to build out that pipeline, the portfolio more, and develop additional precision therapies for AMD. In addition to that, we're also going to be expanding the Character portfolio. Glaucoma is an area that we're very excited about, and we're hopeful of discovering genetically supported therapies in glaucoma as well.
I think what really drove Illuma to be excited about the opportunity was just the alignment, how you guys are thinking about doing things different in a space that definitely needs things done differently and innovative. From the multi-metric data approach to really having high conviction in not only your assets, but your people. From top to bottom. We've been thoroughly impressed with Character's character. The name begets a lot of different things, but most of all, it tells us who you are, who the company is, where the company is going to go. And it also tells us why we should pay attention to a company so special like yours. So we're very honored that you've led us into the Character family. We're very excited to co-lead and help you on what is, for you, somewhere in the journey, but for us, starting this journey together, and for us, having the excitement to actually see things happen in the patients. I think for us, that's what drives Illuma and its team, is to find companies, entrepreneurs like yourself, teams that have been assembled that not only do the biotech job of trying to make therapies, diagnostics, or medical devices, but truly live it day to day, that they know that every time setbacks may happen, but to keep the will to go forward, because at the end of the day, drug discovery is hard, but if we do it right, we have an outsized impact on human health and the greater healthcare ecosystem. So Cheng, I want to thank you for joining me today. Luma is very fortunate to have you and the Character family in our portfolio. We look forward to the great things to come. We're very happy that you allowed us to help co-lead and push forward into what will be a fun and exciting clinical adventure, and hopefully great for the patients. For our listeners, stay tuned for more conversations on Illuminations. And for those who are interested in learning more, we also encourage you to visit our website, where we regularly publish content across a variety of topics.